Welcome back to the Crusades History series on History Decoded Official. In the previous two parts, we journeyed together through the first fiery days, from the Pope's earth-shattering call, the grueling march across continents, to the resounding victory in Jerusalem. From the ashes of war, 4 Crusader states rose proudly: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the County of Edessa. They were not merely military fortresses, but towering symbols of Western ambition and faith in the heart of the East. But glory is often fleeting. Internal fractures, suffocating pressure from the Byzantine Empire, and especially the rise of desert wolves like Zangi quickly cast a deadly shadow over the fate of the Franks. And the inevitable happened. In 1144, Edessa, the first Crusader state to be established, collapsed under Zangi's sword. This event was not merely a military defeat, but the opening shot for the furious counteroffensive of the Islamic world. In part 3 today, let us step into a completely different era. Europe no longer stood idly by. For the first time in history, the most powerful kings of the old continent, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, personally donned their mantles and took up their swords to plunge into the Second Crusade. This was no longer an adventure of nameless knights seeking faith. This was a game of thrones filled with political calculations, insane ambitions, and ending in the most catastrophic tragedies. Right now, join History Decoded as we decipher the War of Kings. The tragedy of kings. The fall of Edessa and the call to arms. The fall of Edessa in 1144 was not merely the loss of a stronghold, but a slap in the face of the Christian world. From east to west, shock prevailed. Desperate pleas for help crossed the sea, echoing all the way to Rome. In 1145, Pope Eugenius III issued the bull Quantum Predecessores, how much our predecessors. This was a historic document. For the first time, the Church pledged to protect the families and property of soldiers who went to war. But the one who truly ignited this flame was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. With mesmerizing eloquence, he traveled across France and Germany, sowing a new and captivating idea in people's hearts. The crusade was not just a war for land, but a path to the salvation of the soul. Christ was opening his arms, and the price of heaven was to take up the sword and set forth. That call created a shockwave, but unlike the last time, this army did not consist only of peasants or scattered knights. This time, the giants had awakened. King Louis VII of France, young, pious, and burning with spirit, and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, who was initially hesitant, but was eventually swept away by Bernard's whirlwind of holy war. This was a total war on 3 fronts. While the kings marched east to save Edessa, other forces advanced into Spain to fight the Moorish Muslims, and up to the Baltic to punish the pagans of the north. Never before had Europe's ambition been so vast. But the East had changed. In Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel Komnenos, received this news with anxiety rather than joy. He was struggling to maintain a fragile balance with the Turks. A massive Western army flooding through his territory would only throw everything into chaos. To protect his country, Manuel was forced to sign a controversial peace treaty with the Muslim Sultan of Rome. Strategically, it was a wise move. But in the eyes of the Westerners, it was betrayal. The Greeks have sold out God. That sentiment began to kindle. In May 1147, Conrad III led the German army out. By September, they reached Constantinople with an attitude of arrogance and indiscipline. Conrad ignored Emperor Manuel's advice to take the safe coastal route. He chose the shortest path, straight into the interior of Asia Minor. It was a fatal mistake. On October 25, 1147, at Dorylaeum, where their forefathers had once won gloriously, the Germans, exhausted and thirsty, fell into a Turkish trap. A rain of arrows poured down. The mighty army was almost wiped out. Conrad luckily escaped death, limping back to Nicaea with the remnants of his troops. His dreams of glory vanished into smoke. King Louis VII and Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine arrived a month later. Receiving the grim news from the Germans, they cautiously followed the coastal route. But the harsh winter and the hostility of the locals, who had to protect their property against the starving army, turned the march into a living hell. Louis believed the Byzantines were deliberately sabotaging them. By the time they reached Antioch, his forces had been terribly depleted. In Antioch, Raymond, the ruler of the city and Queen Eleanor's uncle, proposed a bold plan. Attack Aleppo directly, the headquarters of Nur al-Din, Zangi's son. But Louis refused. He wanted to go to Jerusalem. The conflict reached its peak when rumors spread about a relationship more than just kinship between Queen Eleanor and her uncle Raymond. In jealousy and conservatism, Louis forced Eleanor to leave Antioch, dragging the army to Jerusalem, forgoing a golden opportunity to defeat the real enemy. In Jerusalem, a summit took place with the presence of the most powerful figures: the French king, the German king, who had recovered, and Queen Melisende of Jerusalem. They assembled 50,000 troops, the largest force ever seen. But instead of striking strategic targets like Edessa or Aleppo, they chose to attack Damascus. This was a baffling and disastrous decision. Damascus, fearing Nur al-Din, originally wanted to remain at peace with the Franks. But when backed into a corner, they were forced to call for help from their old enemy, Nur al-Din. In July 1148, the siege of Damascus began and ended after just 4 days. Loose coordination, mutual suspicion, and news of Nur al-Din's approaching reinforcements caused the Crusaders to retreat in panic. A campaign mobilizing the two greatest kings of Europe ended in utter humiliation. Conrad returned, resuming old ties with Byzantium. Conversely, Louis harbored a bone-deep grudge against Emperor Manuel, even plotting a crusade to attack Byzantium. The Second Crusade, which began with so much hope, had collapsed completely. Saint Bernard, to explain this failure, painfully exclaimed, "It is because of our sins. God turned his face away because we were not sincere enough." But to the Muslims, the message was very different. They realized that the Western Knights were not invincible. Edessa was lost. Damascus had escaped danger. And now, a new star was rising in the Islamic sky, one who would unite all to retake Jerusalem. His name was Saladin. The calm before the storm. In the 25 years following the disaster of the Second Crusade, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was fortunate to be ruled by two of the most excellent kings in its history, Baldwin III and Amalric I. Under this era, the Franks still maintained the upper hand. The peak was in 1153 when King Baldwin captured the city of Ascalon, completing the final peace on the southern coast. But that victory was quickly overshadowed. On the other side of the battle line, darkness was looming. Nur al-Din captured Damascus, beginning to tighten the noose. Now the Crusader States no longer faced scattered warlords, but a rising unified Islamic bloc. In the 1160s, the strategic chessboard shifted to Egypt, where the Fatimid dynasty was dying. Both Jerusalem and Damascus understood that whoever captured Egypt would control the game. King Amalric tried to intervene, but he was a step too late. In 1169, Nur al-Din's general Shirkuh captured Cairo. After Shirkuh passed away, power fell into the hands of his nephew, a name that would become the nightmare of the West, Saladin. In 1171, Saladin officially ended the Fatimid dynasty, erasing the division between Sunni and Shia. For the first time in centuries, Islam in the Levant was united under one banner. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was now completely surrounded. To the north was Syria, to the south was Egypt, all in the hands of Saladin. In 1174, King Amalric died. The throne was passed to his son, Baldwin IV. But tragically, the new king was just a 13-year-old boy afflicted with the dreadful disease of leprosy. Despite a decaying and painful body, Baldwin IV possessed an iron will and innate military talent. He was the final wall holding back Saladin. But as the king's health increasingly deteriorated, the kingdom's interior began to tear itself apart. The court was divided into two factions. The court faction, led by the Queen Mother, Princess Sibylla, and her husband Guy of Lusignan. Newcomers, full of ambition but lacking vision. The native barons faction, led by Raymond of Tripoli. Those who understood the enemy well and wanted to maintain peace. Baldwin IV died in 1185, taking the kingdom's stability to the grave with him. After the premature death of the young successor Baldwin IV, the court faction staged a coup. Sibylla took the throne and crowned her husband Guy of Lusignan. An incompetent man now held supreme power, and war was inevitable. Amidst escalating tensions, Renaud of Châtillon, a brutal and arrogant lord, broke the peace treaty by attacking a Muslim caravan. This action was the final straw. Saladin immediately declared holy war, jihad. On July 2nd, 1187, Saladin set a trap at Tiberias. He attacked the city to lure the Crusader army out of their fortified defensive positions. Raymond of Tripoli advised King Guy not to take the bait, but detractors accused Raymond of cowardice. King Guy, in a fateful moment of weakness, ordered the army to march. It was a death sentence for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. On July 3rd, the Crusader army marched under the scorching sun without a single drop of water, constantly harassed by Muslim troops. On July 4th, at the Horns of Hattin, the tragedy occurred. Saladin's troops set fire to the dry grass. Smoke, thirst, and arrows broke the will of the Franks. The formation crumbled. The cavalry was slaughtered. King Guy was captured alive. Renaud of Châtillon was executed by Saladin himself. Almost the entire military force of Jerusalem was wiped out in a single day. Most painful of all, the true cross, the most sacred treasure of Christendom, was seized by the Muslim army and paraded upside down through the streets of Damascus as a trophy of war. After Hattin, nothing stood in Saladin's way. He swept through the coastal cities like a storm. Acre, Sidon, and Beirut fell one by one. On October 2nd, 1187, Saladin stood before the gates of Jerusalem. The defender of the city at that time was Balian of Ibelin. Though fighting bravely in the face of overwhelming power, Balian was forced to negotiate a surrender to save the lives of the people. Unlike the bloodbath of the Crusaders 88 years prior, Saladin allowed the people to leave if they paid a ransom. However, thousands of poor people who could not afford it were sold into slavery. The cross on the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was taken down. The church bells fell silent, replaced by the Muslim call to prayer. Jerusalem had changed masters. By 1189, almost the entire legacy that the Latins had painstakingly built over a century in the Levant had vanished into smoke. Only the city of Tyre and a few lonely fortresses remained standing against the raging waves. The fall of Jerusalem was a shock that shook the very soul of the West, but at the same time it was the bell signaling a new, fiercer confrontation. The Third Crusade, where legends like Richard the Lionheart would step onto the stage of history. Thank you for accompanying History Decoded Official through 3 parts of the Crusades series. If you love this video series, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to give us more motivation to decode the next historical mysteries.